Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar, the sixth in the ongoing series hosted by ISO Technical Committee 347, Data-Driven Agri-Food Systems. My name is Andres Ferreyra. I'll be your presenter for today's session. This webinar series is designed to explore key technical areas where standardization can support innovation, sustainability, and interoperability in agri-food systems. Today's topic, TC 347 Strategic Business Plan, discussing the blueprint for what comes next, relates to the fundamental plan of how we intend to connect and provide value to different actors, from farmers and researchers to technology providers and policymakers worldwide through standards. Since our understanding of the nature and scope of these emerging standards is still incomplete and evolving, our plan will have to evolve too, and also hence the need for discussions like the one that we'll have here today. ISO TC 347 is a new and ambitious committee working to develop international standards that enable trustworthy, inclusive, and effective use of data across agri-food systems. This webinar is part of our commitment to transparency, engagement, and inclusive participation in the standards development process. Today, we aim to introduce the key ideas around the strategic business plans that ISO technical committees are required to develop, describe the draft business plan that TC 347 is working on, and highlight two key areas within it, and show you how you can actively participate in shaping upcoming international standards. A couple of housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel in a few weeks. And please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. We'll address as many as we can during the Q&A segment at the end. Earlier, I mentioned I'll be today's speaker. I usually moderate these webinars, but I do convene TC 347's ad hoc group 1 that developed our strategic business plan. So I'll tell you the story with a little help from two excellent colleagues, Stuart Rhea from ad hoc group 2 and Mark Begbie from advisory group 1. And they'll introduce themselves a little bit later. So with that, let's begin the presentation. It's always great to start with a quote, and I love this one. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail, said by Benjamin Franklin. So let's start talking about the rationale. What is a strategic business plan? Why do we need one? You've probably seen this slide many times in many contexts if you follow TC 347 or the work that preceded it. Our industry has a problem. Our standards just can't support enough of this data-driven decision-making that we need to solve modern problems, much less advance the sustainable development goals. And this emerges from the bottom-up growth of both the industry and its standardization efforts. The standardization system is generally a very bottom-up thing, and if you get together with a few other actors and you're enthusiastic enough and focused enough, you can usually get a standard for something that you want. But the problem is that when you're trying to advance data interoperability across the whole industry, that just isn't enough. You need coordination. The ISO acknowledged this back in 2021, and they chartered a strategic advisory group for smart farming to analyze how the corpus of 25,000 standards that ISO has can be put at the service of data-driven decision-making in agri-food systems or smart farming. What gaps exist in that corpus, and to provide a strategy for how to go about solving that problem. The final report from that group had 49 very specific recommendations, all of which essentially helped shape the plan that you're going to see today. A key part of that proposed strategy was to create a permanent home for standards specific to data-driven agri-food systems. This is now ISO Technical Committee 347. So I mentioned that technical committees are required to develop strategic business plans. So what's a strategic business plan? It's a document that outlines the objectives, the scope, the priorities, and the work plan that a technical committee has, with the intent to ensure that its standards address global needs and remain aligned with the market and stakeholder demands. Quoting scripture here from the ISO directives part 1, after we have our first meeting and within a window of 18 months, they expect us to prepare a strategic business plan for review by the ISO Technical Management Board. So our target date is approaching in October. So we're in the end game of this process after approximately 21 meetings so far of the group, ad hoc group 1, that has been working on this. So let's cover the objectives of a strategic business plan a little bit. First, we have to demonstrate objectively what the specific benefits of this technical committee are expected to be. Then that strategic business plan should also support prioritization. When we have multiple ideas for standards development that are competing for our attention, how do we allocate priorities? Well, we're expected to look at that strategic business plan and make decisions that align with it. We're starting to see quite a bit of traffic of things that that people want to do, and sometimes we have to make decisions. And third, to increase the transparency in relation to what's happening in the market and making sure that we try to maximize the market share represented within the committee. So there's a set of these business plans already on the web, and I will give you that link so that you can look at them as you see fit. So let me put that URL. Got a little bit longer, but I think that will work. So let's move on. And I'm sorry for so much dense text, but we're skipping through it. And I want to get through this official part before we look at some more interesting TC347 pictures. This is a rubric. It lays out how these strategic business plans are evaluated by ISO. And I show this to you not because we've lost a lot of sleep over the evaluation of this, but rather because these sorts of evaluation frameworks are really convenient to give us a sense of what good looks like, right? So some fundamental ideas here. The strategic business plan should describe the relevant dynamics in the business environment, including quantitative indicators of trends in that business environment. It should also explain the tangible benefits that the standardization program is going to bring, describe our objectives and the strategies we're going to use to attain those objectives, then describe things that might get in the way, problems, obstacles that we might find, and how we intend to deal with them. And then a few other things like the priorities that we assign to these projects, the relationships of these projects to regional standardization bodies, particularly with SEN, with which ISO has a strong working relationship, and the range of stakeholders that should be engaged in these particular areas. So these 5 things at the right summarize what needs to be in that document. And ISO has a template like a Word document template to help us fill this out. It basically has three parts: an introduction with a summary, strategic analysis part, and strategic objectives. Filling this out a little more with a little more granularity, the strategic analysis part has several sections, and our strategic objectives section will introduce our strategic objectives, show them in the form of a strategy map, and then talk about the objectives, how we allocate responsibility, how we plan to take action on them, and the priority therein. Going back to the 5 bullets that I showed in the previous slide. So business environment and quantitative information, tangible benefits, the description of the objectives and strategies, the possible problems, the priorities, the relationship with SEN and the stakeholder analysis, they're all here. So let's jump into the green part. You'll have time to read the yellow part soon enough. But let's jump straight into our objectives, which is what we want to make you aware of and get your questions about and so forth. Here, we've worked with a layered approach that's based on a method for strategic management called the balanced scorecard method. And what this thing does is have you represent a set of strategic objectives and the relationships, the dependency relationships within them. And then to do that in a layered way. And this QR code, by the way, is leading you to a place online where we've put this matrix so that then you can follow along and look at it zoomed in, right? So what's important is that we've got strategic objectives. We work our way back from those strategic objectives, and it's a layered structure. Let me zoom in a little bit and show you. So we've got a lowest level that has to do with learning and growth. And please note that these are color-coded. So the dark blue objectives are meant to be very foundational. Then we've got the green ones that are high impact, low effort. Let's call them low-hanging fruit, if you will. Then we've got yellow ones that are high impact, but are probably going to be complex and have dependencies that will require prior work and so forth. And then we have the light blue ones that are probably less work, but also maybe not the most burning priority. So I mentioned we have a lowest layer. This has to do with learning and growth. This is us developing the capabilities to do the rest of the work. So ensuring that our team is trained, ensuring that we have the knowledge that we need to make progress. Above that, we're developing internal processes. For example, using the strategic business plan on a daily basis, managing strategic semantic assets for industry that Stuart will tell us about, and so forth. So putting in place these processes. You see here, enable responsible innovation is one of them. This harkens back to our most recent webinar and so forth. Above that, we have the development of a series of resources. So deliverables, if you will, standards that help us do other things. And what are those other things? The more aspirational end user focused outcomes that we want up here. Ultimately enabling the SDGs as ISO requested from our technical committee. So to help agri-food systems become part of the solution and not part of the problem of the SDGs, to help reduce hunger, to help maintain clean water and life on land and responsible production and consumption and so forth. This, you see dependencies here. has dependencies on two big things. One is satisfied, well-informed, and engaged standards end users. And Mark will tell us a little bit about that. And the other is more efficient, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems. And Stuart will tell us a little bit about how we get there from where we are today. One example, Objective 1.1. We have a table for each one of these 60 or so objectives where we're describing these things that I mentioned earlier. Describing the what, so labeling that objective, answering who's responsible for it. In this case, advisory group 1, which is communications, and an upcoming advisory group on learning and growth that we are going to ballot very, very soon. Why are we doing this? Well, this is the rationale. Why is this important? Then how are we going to do it? Through a set of proposed actions. And finally, what the priority is. So when are we going to do it? As to the sixth question of where we're going to do it, this is the sort of thing that we primarily do online. Our early technical strategy, some of you have seen this pyramid before as well. Early on, we're working in this sort of stratified way. We've got a set of semantic resources and reference data that allow us to agree on what things mean. This means registries of code lists that we can share so that when we represent the meaning of something, that meaning can be understood unambiguously by somebody that we share those data with. Ad hoc group 2, that Stuart is the convener of, and ad hoc group 5 and 6, they operate in this space. The next level above it is agreeing on the resources involved. So how can we describe through data things like farms and fields and people and organizations and the devices that they're using and so forth. Above that, agreeing on how things happen. So a data model for the different aspects of documenting decision-making. So a strategic plan, recommendations, work orders, things like that. We have several of our ad hoc groups that are involved with that right now. And finally, agreeing on how to use what we know. So making tools for data-driven problem solving. And we have ad hoc groups working on that as well. But today we'll start from the very bottom. So let's go back to this strategy map here and highlight these two green boxes: manage strategic semantic assets for the industry and enable semantic interoperability. If we follow those dependency arrows that we talked about, we'll see that from there, we have many dependencies going all the way up to the very top. This involves about half of the strategy map. And so we have with us today Stuart Rhea, the convener of Ad Hoc Group 2, to tell us a little bit more about this. Stuart?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Stuart Rhea, Senior Software Architect at Verity. I also happen to be convener of Ad Hoc Group 2, which is titled Model and Controlled Vocabulary of Crops. I'm also the co-chair of Ag Gateway's Adapt Open Source project. I appreciate the opportunity to share a bit about the work of AHG2 and how it factors into the strategic business plan. So let's dig a little deeper here. You know, agriculture will not unlock the true value of AI until we address our fundamental problem with data quality. There are 6 core data quality dimensions: completeness, uniqueness, timeliness, accuracy, validity, and consistency. Validity is often associated with the syntax or the standardized structure of data. We see our progress in this in agriculture through standards like ISO 11783 and Ag Gateway's ADAPT work. We achieve consistency by having common semantics or shared meaning. Together, common syntax and common semantics allow data to be interoperable and hopefully by extension, actionable by both humans and machines. So, we look at 2.2 here, manage strategic semantic assets for the industry, right? And we're kind of catapulting ourselves into 3.12, so enabling semantic interoperability. I want us to kind of handle these in reverse order. So let's dive in to 3.12 first. Okay? This work represents a series of standards, not just one, but we found that there's some interdependence, right? All these controlled vocabularies play a foundational role in agriculture, but many build upon each other. We chose to start with crop because it directly enables many of the other ad hoc groups. And remember the pyramid diagram from earlier. We're operating at the base of the pyramid. So let's think through one of our primary use cases, the proper application of crop protection. So we have to start with the crop, identifying what crop we're targeting, right? That relates to the field operations we conduct. If we're conducting scouting operations, if we're going to apply a restricted use pesticide, man, we really have to know what pests we're talking about and whether that product is labeled for those pests or not. Well, it's not just what pest, it's what stage of life both the crop we're targeting and the pest we're interested in are in, right? Because the actions of the pesticide depend on those variables. Now, one of the issues is, look, this is a lot of controlled vocabularies. Well, yeah, we need a standard way of fielding these vocabularies. We need some semantic infrastructure. And we'll go back and talk about that in just a minute. You know, we don't want to develop resistance in our plan of treating pests. So we have to be cognizant of mode of action, how these pesticides affect, how these active ingredients affect the pests that we're targeting. Now, the next one here, the canonical units of measure, is a bit of a convenience issue, right? When we look at the way that we're taking counts of aphids on the back of a leaf on a citrus tree or something like that, oftentimes when we're making those observations, we end up using different scales, different canonical units of measures to make those observations. And that's problematic, especially when you're looking at trying to make things interoperable. Next one. The formulation of the product that we use is really important because it speaks to things like the loads of active ingredient. If you've used other products in the past on a particular field, you have to keep track of how much absolute active ingredient is there. This also plays into things like maximum residual levels that apply to export restrictions for produce. Eventually, we reach product, right? So whether it's Roundup or Trivapro or whatever that product might be, we need a controlled vocabulary of those. And there are businesses who have a business model that supply that information. But those products come with use restrictions that are often expressed on the product label itself. Right now, those restrictions, you know, typically you have to have a human to read those and to understand what the label says. But there's ongoing work in digitizing that product label and making it so that this data is machine actionable and machine readable. So that starting from the crop that you have in your field and how you're cultivating it to what end, right? Whether you're growing it for its fruit or you're growing it for its root or you're growing it for its fiber, all of that plays in to the decisions of what crop protection products you can use and how much. So you can see that there's a massive amount of interdependence across these. And, you know, many of you may be thinking, but wait, EPO and the FAO's ontologies and things like that. And you're absolutely right. We're not looking to reinvent the wheel. What we're looking to do is standardize how we vend, how we support, how we source these vocabularies to the industry as a whole. One problem child is unit of measure. And it's it's kind of fundamentally unsettling how that's something that we haven't agreed upon, right, as an industry yet, is a fundamental set of unit of measure labels to make use of. And there are a few popular ones. So, next slide. If we go back to the objectives diagram here, right, and look specifically at section 2.2, yeah, it's labeled manage strategic semantic assets for industry. What's a semantic asset? So standards often include kind of slow changing attributes. And those are typically managed in the usual standard cycle, right? Especially within ISO. But there are some aspects of this, specifically like the controlled vocabularies that we're talking about here, where we're dealing with fast changing standards, fast changing data. Luckily, ISO has a mechanism for dealing with this. They're called management agencies and registration authorities. And by making use of this mechanism, what we can do is set up a standardized way of curating these controlled vocabularies and making them available to the industry as a whole.
Thank you, Stuart. Quick question.
Sure.
So you showed us an ecosystem standards that the plan for which underlie this box 3.3.12 that we were just looking at, and also 3.2 or 2.2. I'm sorry. Is all this work meant to happen, in series, one after the other, or will there be work in parallel?
Excellent question. It really depends on the people that show up, right? And so we don't want to burn out the usual suspects, but we also want to make some pretty quick progress. You know, di- Dipping into first principles here. Remember that what we're doing here is we're trying to enable all these different actors to exchange data. And if the meaning isn't preserved, then it's just not going to work. Um, we need to actively recruit and look for subject matter experts that want to come in and play at this space and that can help us accelerate this. This plays really nicely into the next section here about communication and about how we need to get the word out of what we're doing and how we need people like those that are attending this webinar to come and contribute and play.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I'm sure there will be questions in the Q&A section later about the finer points of our agri-semantics program. So let's shift over to our communication strategy. Still showing the dependencies here in a more transparent red, but here let's explore the other set of dependencies that lead up to enabling the SDGs, and they have to do with communications. And there's plenty of those dependencies in our plan, starting with helping our members excel at communication skills, going all the way down to learning and growth. And we see that there's a propagation of dependencies there all the way up to the top again. And we have the privilege of having Mark Begbie, a co-convener of Advisory Group 1 on communications, here today also to tell us a little bit more about this. Mark?
Thank you, Andres. I'm Mark Begbie. I'm the founder and principal consultant at the Acceleration Foundry, which is based here in New Zealand, just outside Wellington. As Andres says, I'm the co-convener of Advisory Group 1 on communications, and I'm delighted to be able to speak to everyone this evening. As with the rest of the strategic business plan, the premise of comms is a layered structure with a series of elements that build on each other. Next slide, please. They're predominantly foundational activities, so the dark blue structures. And the objective here is to ensure that our members excel at communications, right down at the bottom in 1.1, and end up with satisfied end users of the standards system. So the start of that is establishing processes. Next slide, please. So that's the current focus at the moment. We're in the early stages of TC 3447, and we need to establish a firm foundation. So that's all about facilitating skills development so that everyone within the community is enabled and empowered. A part of that, two key focus areas will be around responsible innovation. So ensuring that we are listening to the community and listening to a broad range of views, both technical and non-technical, ethical, to ensure that what we're doing is responsible and sustainable and so forth. Another area we're looking at in some depth is proactive youth engagement. So the youth as essentially the future of the industry, and also trying to establish, engender an excitement, an idea that careers in agritech and agri-data can be exciting, that it's not just about a manual system. Then the next stage that we're moving on to will be materials. So as we develop these processes and start to build materials, these will be a shared set of resources, and they're really there to encourage and enable the community, and they're a key element in that process of facilitating communication excellence. And that takes us to the outcomes that we're looking for. So we're wanting to maximize the capacity of communications in TC 347 as a whole group exercise, not focused on overloading a few individuals, but facilitating and building capacity. And if we do this right, we ensure that there's a consistency of message. There's that little issue of maintaining adherence to rules, and we need to be cognizant that ISO is a large, well-established organization, and we need to protect their identity and their structures and so on and so forth. And if we're doing things right, then we'll end up at 4.2. We'll have a set of satisfied and well-informed users of standards. Next slide, please. So within communications, there's really two facets that we're talking about here. One is that inward communication between and across people within the ISO TC 347 development community. And that comes round to ensuring that we're building high quality outputs, that we are maintaining momentum by keeping everyone informed, and critically, we're identifying potential duplication, and we're avoiding that so that we're only doing things once. And then outwardly looking, it's about promoting and engaging, but it's just as important that we're setting up a communications system and processes that allows TC347 to listen. We have to be responsive to the widest set of stakeholders possible if we're going to end up with standards that are fit, appropriate, and are to be adopted. So really, it's that two-way engagement. And overall, we want to stimulate thought. We want to promote conversations, and we want to facilitate a consensus around what a good standard looks like. Last slide, please. And we do that by enabling the team, facilitating training and upskilling, and that feeds down into the layer right at the bottom, making sure that people have the skills, capabilities, and resources that they need. We create the processes and guidelines to help people achieve that and to excel in that. We provide them with the physical means that they need to get started, to break that blank sheet of paper. And we maintain those key communication channels. And AG1 itself will have a critical role in maintaining key stakeholder communication channels, as well as facilitating the rest of the community to maintain their channels effectively and to show a coherent message it's clear that we're all talking to one another inside. We're engaging with the young professionals proactively, as I say, and there'll be more coming out on that shortly, but that's an exciting approach to engaging a global cohort of young people. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I have a quick question for you. What's the relationship meant to be between Advisory Group 1 and the other subgroups within the TC347 organization?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good question, because there's the likes of Advisory Group 2, which is specifically about stakeholder engagement. So how do we fit with them? So AG1 itself really has three key functions. So delivering those core external communication activities that raise awareness of TC347 as a whole across the widest possible audience and encouraging participation is something AG1 would be expected to shoulder the responsibility for. And then driving those internal communications and ensuring that other subgroups have all of the materials and processes and skills they need to be effective. So, for instance, with AG2 on stakeholder engagement, it's making sure that they have the materials to do that work. It's not that AG1 is responsible for this strategic work of understanding who those stakeholders are and how best to address them. We just provide the material and resources to support that activity.
Thank you, Mark. Before we enter our last segment, let me quickly answer a question that came in through the chat. Will the presentation be made available to attendees? If so, how and where? The answer is yes. We're going to put it on our YouTube channel. And on one hand, we will email you using the email address that you provided when you registered to let you know that it's up and give you the URL. But also you can search for our ISO TC347 YouTube channel in a few weeks. We don't have anything up there right now. The string of webinars will start popping up there starting soon. So let's talk briefly about how we're working to make this happen. We work through subgroups, of which we have 4 flavors. The first two are advisory groups and ad hoc groups. Advisory groups are those which are convened to deal with ongoing concerns, like communications in the case of Mark, or stakeholder engagement or responsible innovation, where we are putting in place a little organization within the greater TC 347 to keep processes going. Then ad hoc groups, in contrast, are convened to meet specific goals in limited time intervals. And we use those to house emergent work. So when something new comes along that's going to turn into a standardization process, we house them in an ad hoc group while we're figuring out what interoperability looks like in that space, and also lets us get our heads together before the rather demanding ISO standards clock starts running. There's a limited time in which to develop a standard and publish it once you've declared the intent officially. Something we don't have yet, but that are coming soon, I think starting in the fourth quarter of the year, is working groups. These are where standards are actually developed. And I imagine that we're going to have several long-running working groups early in the life of the committee, like agri-semantics, that will come out of the work that Ad Hoc Group 2 is doing, resource definitions, master data, several groups that will probably live on for a long time. Finally, we have preliminary work items. These are a more visible way of initiating work compared to an ad hoc group. When we start those, they have a 3-year clock. An ad hoc group doesn't really have a clock except what we declare during the creation of the group. And we intend to use this approach once we have the rudiments of interoperability in place. And the person that raised their hand, Raghu, please put your question or comment in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll open things up later. Now, how do we ensure that TC 347 doesn't turn into an even better way to dig, right? We saw a picture earlier of a piece of construction equipment, mired in mud. And so here with this one of a bigger piece of equipment mired in an even bigger hole. So how do we make sure that we don't create that kind of problem for the industry? That's an important question because our members are eager to work. Right? We've already got 6 ad hoc groups focused on producing standardization proposals and some very different things. And though in some cases they have overlaps, and there's more coming, right? It's a great opportunity, but there are also risks, like we could develop standards that are uncoordinated amongst themselves. So they have what's called incoherence or divergence, right? They're mutually incompatible. That would be making industry interoperability problems even worse than they are today. And the other one is unintended consequences, where maybe by coming up with a standard with the best intention, we actually made some vulnerable group of stakeholders even more vulnerable. We have proactively created a responsible innovation advisory group within our technical committee to always be thinking about these things. Also, another thing that we did is create what's called IWA 47. This wasn't a TC 347 move, but rather these two things go together. We decided as part of or rather the Strategic Advisory Group for Smart Farming recommended, and this was implemented later, to start work on a reference architecture, even before there was a working group or a proposal to make a standard on a reference architecture, using what's called an international workshop which is a group that has great agility and a lot less of an administrative burden than a technical committee. And with that IWA, who many of the people who are currently in this webinar have participated in, we had a series of meetings and produced a very interesting corpus of use cases, an interesting corpus of business capabilities, and an interesting corpus of terms and definitions that will be extremely helpful in advancing TC 347's architectural work. Now, not everything is perfect here because we need more representation. You've probably seen this diagram, which is an example of what the sort of primary supply chain that has crop input manufacturers, distributors, retailers, the farmer, the people that buy from them, food processors, and so forth, all the way to the consumer and the dinner plates, and then a constellation of other actors that interact with them. And I can say that our coverage of this collection of actors and their interests and the ideas for standardization that might help them with the people that we currently have is significant. There's a lot of expertise in our group, but there's still areas that we need more representation in. So we're underrepresented in the final stages of the supply chain. So we need more about consumers and their dinner plates, or food retailers, food distributors, and also food, feed, fiber processors and packagers. We've got some people in that latter group, but we need more. So tell your friends. So what comes next? It's important to understand that in our strategic business plan, there's no expectation of perfection. Reality and our understanding of it change over time. What's really important is having a robust mechanism to review and improve that strategic business plan periodically. That's far more important than getting it perfect the first time. So for those of you who are TC 347 members, just remember, we're on a tight schedule now. Our members have had ample opportunity to take part in ad hoc group 1 that's been developing this by giving each member the opportunity to have 2 representatives. So from each country, we've had up to 2 people, and we're converging towards a CIB ballot. So a committee internal ballot, though that ballot isn't the moment to go back to first principles. Please engage with your national standards body or liaison organization to read the draft, provide comments. Please focus on glaring omissions, glaring misstatements of fact, things like that. If there's something that you think should be there, let us know. And we'll seriously consider putting it in, or it might be parked until the next iteration. But your comments will certainly be given the highest consideration. You can participate by primarily working online. There's 2 plenary meetings per year. There's one in October. That's 2 half days that's virtual. And then there's an in-person one in March that is planned to happen in Germany in March of next year. The subgroups, like the ad hoc groups and advisory groups, meet more often, but they set their own schedule. And there's 3 ways of contributing. Through your national standards body, which is certainly the preferred way. You participate directly in the work, you help vote, and if you want to participate, you don't know who the standard body for your country is, just reach out, just email me on that email or my own personal email. I'll be happy to help you find the people to talk to. Another possibility, especially if your country isn't a member yet, is to participate through a liaison organization, of which we currently have 10. Ag Gateway, the Ag Industry Electronics Foundation, International Society of Precision Agriculture. The upcoming one is the Pan-African Society of Agricultural Engineering, and so forth. You can see these organizations in our website, down here, main ISO page, and so forth. A third way is through IWA 47. This can give you a taste of what this is like. You insert yourself in this network of people, and so forth. This QR code shows you how to register for IWA 47. There's still a few months of that left, so it's not too late. So with that, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to present these things. Let's see if we have some questions. So Raghu has a question here about existing or planned synergies between ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, and ISO in the area of semantic interoperability, particularly in relation to data exchange standards and ontologies for digital agriculture and smart farming systems. If so, how are these efforts being coordinated to avoid duplication and ensure alignment across sectors or systems? Excellent question. We have had some informal contact with ITU in that the formal mechanisms of collaboration have produced some opportunities for us to talk at ITU events, especially back when we were a strategic advisory group for smart farming. And we want to create, as part of one of those 49 recommendations that I mentioned earlier, want to create a group that allows us to do joint landscaping with IC, with ITU, with IEEE, and some de facto standards organizations like FAO and so forth. That is harder to implement than it sounds. And so we've been poking around that for some time. There's a couple of models that we can follow to set up that kind of conversation that we intend to explore in Q4 also. So Raghu, that is a topic that's very important. Divergence is terrible, not just among standards in the same group, but among different organizations as well. Then we have a question from Martin Kraft. So thank you for this interesting presentation, and I wish everybody great success for the finalization of the Strategic Business Plan version 1. Thank you. Today we heard about crop production and plant protection. You mentioned the missing participation of the food sector. How well is livestock production addressed by the SBP? Great question. Back in the days of the Strategic Advisory Group for Smart Farming, we created a subgroup on livestock and animal products. And that was chaired by a gentleman from ICAR, the International Committee on Animal Registration, something like that. A great organization that deals with the semantics of animal production, especially for dairy. And after looking at the capability model and so forth, his reaction was against what I thought earlier. The capability model for crop production that was produced by this group is actually remarkably similar to what we need for livestock production, but we should really add a few specific capabilities. And he pointed out like 3 different ones, primarily the tracking of the activities of animals or groups of animals, call them herds, flocks, or what have you. And for that, we've created an ad hoc group 6 within the technical committee that's, I think, doing our most sophisticated semantic work in that space. And so we have an active effort to harmonize that work with ad hoc group 2, and so to move forward monolithically, enabling a good interoperability between cropping and livestock systems is one of our most important objectives. If you look at that strategy map that I mentioned earlier, you'll see it in a very high place in our list of aspirations. That being said, we can certainly use more stakeholders from the animal products side of things. Thank you for that question. And we have another one, another comment. Okay, from Rago. Any other questions? Any final thoughts? Let's see. What have we got here? Q&A. Open. All right. If not, again, thank you very much. That QR code right there, as I mentioned, provides the link to the registration in IWA 47. Earlier, I provided a QR code to the place on the web where we are storing this strategy map for you to look at, and I'm going to put the link in the chat. Finally, to any of you who come to TC 347 webinars for the first time, I apologize. This wasn't the easiest introduction to TC 347 because we had a very specific topic to deal with, which was our strategic business plan. But we would like to invite you to reach out, and we can put you on a mailing list for when all the previous webinars are published. Also, please note, I just put that link in the chat, and that link is associated. It leads to a subpage of a page that has other resources as well that you can look at. And with that, I want to thank Stuart and Mark, who valiantly participated in this, either very early in the morning for Stuart or very late at night for Mark. So thanks, guys, and thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
You happy with that?
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you.